Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. Today we look at the terror attack on an army unit in Nagrota which took the lives of 7 army personnel including 2 officers. This is not the first such attack on a major army establishment. In the recent past, both Pathankot and Uri are part of the same pattern. India has been dealing with a proxy war supported by Pakistan since 1990, and 26 years later, the strategy of seeking to bleed India by 1,000 cuts, as also the tactics deployed, are familiar. The adversary has been consistent, determined, and ruthless. But what about the Indian response over the last 26 years? Is this challenge as intractable as it seems? Post-Kargil, in 1999, it appeared that the government of the day, led by Prime Minister Vajpayee, was embarking upon the kind of overhaul that the defense management of the country needed. But this welcome initiative remained suspended. It is a matter of considerable regret that 16 years later, the same issues are being debated emotively but alas inconclusively. What is the way ahead? To discuss this issue as objectively as is possible, we have an eminent panel. Allow me to introduce Mr. Rana Banerji, a former Special Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat, Ms. Suhasini Haidar, Diplomatic Editor of The Hindu, and Major General Afsir Karim, Editor of Akrosh, all of them differently Pakistan experts in their own way. Mr. Banerji, if I could request you to go first and perhaps contextualize Nagrota.
Well, it is indeed tragic, and it focuses attention once again to the lack of immediate or prompt enough action to strengthen perimeter security of the rear outposts of army establishments, which has been flagged as a need of the hour, particularly after the General Compose Committee gave its recommendations.
Which is post-Pathankot.
Post-Pathankot. What we have to realize is that the newer militants who have come in of the Lashkar or the Jaish are extremely battle-hardened and well-trained. And they have an exclusive sort of task of only attacking military targets, not civilians. And this enables the other side to be or remain in a state of denial that they are not involved, and it's the internal resentment which is emanating forth. So we have to continuously now be alert and upgrade our defenses on a complete priority.
So it really is a case of trying to be even more alert than we are. But I'll come back to this in a moment. Ms. Haidar, if I could ask you to look at the diplomatic, shall we say, relevance of Nagrota, Pakistan in the regional grid when we are preparing for the heart of Asia, and at the global level when there is talk about the United States, for instance, reviewing its policy as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Well, I think many have already pointed out that after the response to the Uri attack, after the surgical strikes that were announced by the DGMO, India had diplomatically put Pakistan in a position where it would have to react, regardless of which way it would react, right? First, there was the surgical strikes. Before that, India had already made it clear that they were going to cross the red line on non-interference with Balochistan. Thirdly, India then went ahead to diplomatically isolate Pakistan on the subject of SARC. Having done all these 3 measures, it was expected that there would be a response from Pakistan. If the government thought that response would be for Pakistan to say, here we're putting down our weapons, we're not going to allow terrorist groups to cross the LOC anymore, I think that would have been a very naive supposition. So there should have been a very, very real expectation that having made the point that India was now prepared not only to cross the LOC, because they've crossed the LOC in the past, but that they were willing to make this publicly humiliate the Pakistani army, that there would be a response of some sort. In terms of diplomacy, to be honest, I don't see what purpose diplomacy serves when there are no channels for talking. The only channels that we have today in talks are when the High Commissioner of India is summoned to the Foreign Office in Islamabad for a démarche, and the opposite happens in Delhi as well. There is no actual channel of communication that is discussing anything apart from perhaps just bringing down the tensions at the LSE.
And I think in the Indian case, but we'll come back to that later, is when the Indian media provides a platform to the Pakistani High Commissioner to hold forth on a range of issues. But I'll come back to that. General Karim, a question that everyone is asking in the country, you see this in editorials today, almost in every major paper. Pathankot, Uri, Nagrota, you know this entire area very well, having served there. What allows a determined group of terrorists to actually enter a corps headquarters or even the outside of a corps headquarters and breach an army unit? So where are the lapses taking place?
You see, the first thing is that if you sit down in defenses surrounded by barbed wires and sentries, over a period of time, you become completely complacent. While the enemy has to succeed once, and you are then exposed. Having said that, actually the army has to look at its proper deployment of troops to surround the areas which are supposed to be sensitive. All these places, there have been lapses, and the army has to accept those lapses and make amendments. If you see J&K, most of the headquarters and all that are along the road, main roads, because that is how it happened in 1948 onwards. The land they got, they deployed there. They're not the right places really at the moment in this kind of warfare. Therefore, all kinds of vehicles and people, they pass through that area next door. And after that, it becomes easy to approach those places. So it has to be a reorientation of your own perimeter defenses and the technique you are using. But all we are looking at it at the operational level. Actually, we have to create a strategy or find a strategy by which you can deter Pakistan doing such kind of attack, which may be just not one attack across the border, but something much more. But I don't see it's happening.
Or the kind of, shall we say, resolve that we need in terms of what to do. Rana, one of the issues that constantly comes up is the role of intelligence in preempting or allowing the security forces to respond in the appropriate manner. We discussed this after Uri, and perhaps we were in the same panel on that. And now, after what has happened in Nagrota, one of the suggestions being made is that over the last 10 days, there was the equivalent of an alert that had been received from the local grid, whether it was state police or the other agencies, and that they had actually identified Nagrota. Now, how does this work? Because even after Mumbai 2008, we had the same kind of, shall we say, anguish that the intelligence, was it actionable? If so, what are the lapses that are happening institutionally?
Well, today there has been a statement which is, I think, I don't know, it's a little controversy from the army side, that it was only a general alert and it was not specific to Nagrota, the one which came 10 days back. So I don't exactly know what was the nature and content of the specific alert which was issued. But what has been happening is that, you see, these type of incidents or the inputs in intelligence relating to such acts have become very, very common or frequent. So it's a case of cry wolf, and the army sometimes feels that they are not worth the paper that they are written or conveyed. So it is a crisis of confidence on both sides. One has to take intelligence inputs seriously, even if they are of a general nature, and the nature of the alert should then be pervasive. It should not be sort of stepped down or after a few days. It's easy to say this, but I would still think that there is a case for taking all alerts seriously over a length of time.
Well, again, I say this with some sadness, because we made the same kind of observations. When I say we, I would say the community that looks at these issues after Mumbai, saying that we need to have a complete overhaul of the way in which the intelligence is being provided and how it is being assessed and reviewed. But I think this is going to be an endemic
No, the
issue.
coordination now is indeed much better with the SMAC and the tightening up of sharing of inputs from center to the state, and also keeping important nodal
But
points in the
greater
loop.
refinement. Suhasini, you were saying?
I do want to make the point that there is a diplomatic connection, because over the last 2.5 to 3 years, and possibly before that, you don't have any diplomatic ties. Fine, that is a government's decision. But have they considered the impact this is having on our military? The kind of impact you're having, where at the LOC, at the international border, post after post is now suffering a strain they have not suffered during those years between 2003 and 2008, when the LOC actually went silent. So you are seeing it's not just about giving people equipment or intelligence or giving people the right amount of weaponry. It is about human beings at the LOC. When we talked about the Uri attack, the fact was many of those who died brutally in their sleep, because they had just finished another assignment. They were coming over there. They are tired out. If you put your men on alert for years on end, I can only imagine. I'm not a military person, all of you are, but I can only imagine the impact that's going to happen. And that sense of alert is only going to continue until you are able to see some kind of a political resolution
or movement. I'm going to come back to you, Suhasini, on the other issue, which is the US and Pakistan. But General Karim, if I could just pick up the thread from what Suhasini said, the army has now been deployed for almost 25 years as far as the low intensity conflict, internal security, extending into the LOC, IB as far as Pakistan is concerned. Is there a case, meaning that the army has been on the defensive for a fairly long period? Now, for the first time, we saw the surgical strike post-Uri, and a sense of political resoluteness, if I could describe it in that way. So, have we reached a point now, maybe it's taken us a very long time, to re-strategize? And if so, what is the way ahead? I'm sure some things may not be appropriate for the public domain, but is it a question of really rewiring the whole, shall we say, deployment of troops? For instance, there is one theory that, or one view, that we need to be looking at special forces and penny packets in a far more focused way, the quick reaction teams and so on. So with your experience, how do you look at the, shall we say, challenge for the army?
You see, firstly, when you deploy the army in a static role, it has become an internal security force. It has lost all those qualities which make it a lethal force. It has just become like any ordinary police force. I think that has to change. Secondly, defenses cannot succeed forever. Every kind of defense can be penetrated once in a while. So therefore, you have to take offensive action. That offensive action is missing. So I'd like to bring out a point here. Pakistan is not really responding. It is always acting. It is we are who are reacting. Now this kind of a thing cannot continue. So a new strategy, a new kind of deployment, a new kind of equipment and forces are required to deal with this situation. I think this warfare has to be dealt in a different way than just deploying forces there and firing across it or sitting in a fence.
And we imagine that our young officers at the colonel, brigadier level, whether it's in the College of Combat or elsewhere, must be applying their minds about, what are the kind of, shall we say, innovative approach. Because it's a good point that you're making, that for 26 years it appears as if India has been engaged only in defending its own goal. Yeah. That we have not identified what is the goal on the other side that could be scored, and maybe that needs to be thought through. But Suhasini, I want to bring you back. The United States and Pakistan, for a long time we have often said that the support given by both the US and China emboldens Pakistan and also in a way blunts India's attempt to quote unquote isolate Pakistan. The recent Trump conversation, how would you you're already smiling.
I don't think we can make too much of the conversation if you were trying to compare the US's relationships with India versus Pakistan. Prime Minister Modi, by comparison, spoke to Mr. Trump as soon as he had won the election on the same day on November 9th, whereas this call has only been put through nearly a month later. But I do think that the substance of the conversation, as was put off, and that's why I smile, put out by the Pakistani government, seems to indicate that Mr. Trump is not really seeing this region with the levels of concern that perhaps he's going to look at with others. And that is what India should worry about. That after all these years, the US has a new president. and somebody who is not as engaged with the region as he perhaps is with China, as he perhaps is with Russia, as he perhaps is with Europe, and is also shows that he is concerned with his domestic issues. In that scenario, will China be given the space to kind of take a leadership role in Asia? Will that mean that China's relations with Russia, Russia's and China's new relations with Pakistan will have some kind of an impact on the India-Pakistan equation? I think what we have to be very clear about is that India and Pakistan are going to have to deal with each other, regardless of who offers and tries to mediate or take sides or all the rest of that. India and Pakistan are going to have to sort out their problems together, or at least bilaterally. And right now, we don't even have the starting point of that conversation in view.
Well, as you said, India has been trying to sort of encourage Pakistan to come back to the bilateral track in a rational way since January 2004, when Mr. Vajpayee was here, but we haven't made much progress. But Rana, coming to this point about how Pakistan will come to the table, if ever, the most recent domestic development in Pakistan is the fact that General Bajwa has taken over as the army chief. Now again, there is a very emotive kind of view in India that what happened in Nagrota is really a signal that the new chief will continue with the policies of the old chief, ostensibly, for which we link the Uri attack. Now that seems too binary. So how would you look at the domestic, shall we say, situation within Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, General Bajwa, and whatever be the way they are positioning themselves?
Before that, if I may just say, you see, the Pakistanis would be very happy if they can bring back US to a position of rehyphenating, India and Pakistan. And they would like to go along with anything which suggests an intermediary role in US intervention in, Indo-Pak issues. That said, on the domestic thing, it would be incorrect to connect the transition in Pakistan, the appointment of the new chief, to what has been happening here. If at all, it could be a signal from the non-state actors that we are there and we are still relevant, and could be a signal to point out or focus on their continuing utility to the new administration.
To Rawalpindi.
To Rawalpindi, if there is any contemplation of a change of policy. But apart from that, you see, the things are yet to evolve on the domestic front. The Supreme Court at present is undertaking quite a serious inquiry into the various documents or efforts to show how the Nawaz Sharif family were.
You're referring to the Panama Papers, as they call them.
Panama trial.
Yeah.
And the PM has sort of said that he will abide by whatever decision the courts come to. And so far, the trial is not going very well for the Nawaz family. So that is one aspect. And the other thing is, of course, the expectation that with Bajwa coming in, there will be a new definition of civil-military relations. For the reason that Nawaz Sharif has chosen number 4 in the seniority list, he would have had some assessments or calculations about how Bajwa will take on his role. But every time this has happened in the past, once the new man becomes the army chief, he goes back to the, he develops as his own man, as the chief, and he goes back to the army's, collegiate conception, orientation about its role in foreign affairs or in security issues. So I think
this
that
is a fair
change.
point that it's early days, and secondly, I think even on Nagrota, we should wait for our own investigating teams to do whatever they need to before I think we dot all the I's and cross the T's.
We should actually focus on our internal lapses.
And our lapses. Yes. But Suhasini, on this, if I could just extend this point to you, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's domestic compulsions are reasonably well known, and the fact that civil military has always been strained. But is there a sense that the politics of Pakistan, for whatever credibility they have in the system, are now ready to come back to the table? Because that is where I think that is the holy grail for India and Pakistan.
Coming back to the table, Pakistan keeps saying it wants to come to the table. It is India who is saying that there cannot be talks without terror.
Addressing the terror issue.
Addressing the terror issue, and without terror actually stopping. The fact is that if you start looking at what is happening in Pakistan in a small timeline, you are not going to be able to get out of Pakistan's own problems, because their problems are always continuing, whether it is the Prime Minister's weakness vis-a-vis the judiciary, whether it is the opposition's taking on of the Prime Minister, whether it is the armies pushing for more positions and more power inside the Pakistani polity. I think you're going to constantly have this to deal with. India has to deal with Pakistan. I think we also, and this may be a personal opinion, we have to move away from this constant idea we have of strengthening democratic institutions, as if the democratic institutions and the military institutions in Pakistan are inimical to each other when it comes to relations with India. I think there is a considered Pakistan policy. We are facing it. We are facing it even in Nagrota, as a matter of fact. But it will have to be a long-term view. You spoke about Prime Minister Vajpayee taking that view for talks with Pakistan, despite coming out of the Kargil war. And it has to be that kind of a long-term view to where we want to head with this relationship. How much are we going to let Pakistan impinge on our resources, take away our time, take away our attention from the more important
and dominate
issues.
the domestic kind of discourse. But on that, General Karim, when we talk about Nagrota, Jammu, core headquarters, part of Jammu Kashmir, we said we were there for 26 years as the Indian Army was deployed. We cannot really, I think, divorce it from the internal dynamic in India, which is Jammu and Kashmir. And even post Nagrota, over the last 12 hours, there's been a reference to Afzal Guru. So as far as the situation inside J&K is concerned, now you spoke about this army being deployed for 26 years and becoming the equivalent of an extended security force or an internal policing force. But is there any other option for India, meaning that the army has been there in a very visible way because of the LOC and the fact that you have an external neighbor who is hostile to India? We also are familiar with the China-Pakistan relationship on this issue. So for India, the role of the Indian Army, we attempted the Sadbhavana, saying that we have to address the sentiment. Now, where are we going with all of that?
You see, the army's job is to defend the country, not sitting only on borders, but so many other ways. Now, in J&K, it is sitting under a UN resolution, and that is their job. Since you have brought them in politics and in internal security, now people have started resenting them. It was not previously, it was not the case. And we have to rethink this whole issue, whether deploy the army in what way or not to deploy the army. After all, what is happening inside J&K is not war, it's just police force action. And it can be done by any other force than the army. So I suggest that the army should be generally kept out of it and allowed to do its own strategic thinking and doing and deployment rather than this.
And allow the local politics to really find their own.
The army is getting involved in local politics in J&K, which is not very healthy.
Desirable.
So therefore, some other methods have to be found out and the army should be kept out of it.
The Nagrota terror attack once again draws attention to an abiding national security challenge. How to evolve an effective, affordable and sustainable policy towards Pakistan and the Rawalpindi strategy of supporting terrorism and the jihadi ideology that underpins it. Clearly, this has to be a multi-domain effort that involves every aspect of national capability and resolve. While the army needs to do its own internal reviews that will ensure higher levels of tactical readiness, for instance, the use of appropriate surveillance technology to improve perimeter security and the access to military establishments. However, it is the national resolve that also needs objective scrutiny. Political dissonance over national security challenges must be overcome, and a constructive debate in Parliament over national security imperatives is as desirable as it remains elusive, alas. Since the Kargil War of 1999, many well thought out recommendations have been made, but their implementation remains inadequate and effete. In the current instance, the Philip Campos recommendations are case in point. These should be prioritized and acted upon on a war footing. And yes, India is facing a proxy war where the adversary is able to enter almost at will and attack major military bases and soft civilian targets. The post-Uri Indian surgical strike took place on September 29th. The euphoria that followed was misplaced. Nagrota took place on November 29th, 2 months later. The writing is on the wall. about what India needs to do so that its young soldiers do not die in vain. On that note, let me thank my guests, Mr. Banerji, Ms. Haidar, and General Karim. And thank you for watching Security Scan. Goodbye.